Greetings, everyone. I'm Eric Mackey, and I'm one of your trainers for DESE's PBIS Academy. This video is focused on answering why behavior occurs and provides recommendations for how to respond to behavioral errors. The content for this video was developed by the Center on PBIS and Northeast PBIS. In this video, we'll discuss the functions or the whys behind behavior, as well as strategies to support students through stages of escalation, especially in the efforts of de-escalating emotions and behaviors. Your responsibilities will be to take this content and plan professional development for your staff. You'll then submit your agenda or calendar to any PBIS through the Canvas system. First, let's talk about the why behind student and adult behavior. The better we understand the why behind an individual's behavior, the more effectively we can address the behavior. What we know based on behavioral research is that there are two core whys, or what we like to call functions, of behavior. And that's either to get something or to escape something. What are those things that we're trying to get or escape? Well, they tend to fall into the categories of sensory stimulation, like sounds, smells, tastes, textures, visuals. There's also social stimulation, like adult or peer attention. And there's also tangibles and activities like games, toys, classwork, or homework. The child from the meme in the prior slide said that if you cry, you get sent to the thinking chair and you get a vacation from work. He's making it fairly clear that he's purposely trying to get out of classwork. So to put his behaviors in the terms of function, he's crying for the function of escaping an activity, such as work. He's being pretty articulate. Not all of our students can or will express such intentions so explicitly. So in order to determine the function of anyone's behavior, we need to take data over time. The function of someone's behavior also ties into what encourages or discourages behaviors to happen. If I want attention and I get attention for tantruming, I'm more likely to tantrum again. That would be considered positive reinforcement. If I want to escape classwork and when I act out in class, I'm sent out of class, I'm more likely to act out again. That would be considered negative reinforcement. We want to consider the why behind a behavior so that we can reduce the chance of us mistakenly reinforcing a behavior we don't want to see, and so that we can use that why, or the function, to prompt more socially acceptable behaviors like hand raising, asking for help, all of that instead of tantruming. We determine the function of a student's behavior not just from one incident, but from several incidences. This helps us to figure out the patterns. To determine the why behind a behavior, we need to gather data on the ABCs of behavior. What are the ABCs? Well, the A stands for the antecedent. That is what happens before the behavior of concern happens. The B stands for the target behavior of concern. This is hopefully defined in terms such that we can observe and measure the behavior. And the C stands for consequence. Most people associate consequence with punishment. I'm going to ask you to think of the concept of consequence more broadly. In the ABCs of behavior, a consequence is more along the lines of what happens directly after a behavior or the impact of that behavior. This consequence could discourage the behavior, like a punishment, or it could encourage a behavior like gaining attention or escaping classwork, which could be considered reinforcing for that student or individual. So let's go through a couple examples. Here we have the example of Martha. She's calling out in class during teacher lectures. In response, the teacher looks at her, redirects her, and every once in a while calls on her. What's the antecedent in this scenario? It's the teacher lecture. What's the behavior that we're concerned about? That's Martha calling out. And what is the consequence, or what are the consequences? We have teacher attention in the form of looks, redirections, and calling on Martha. So based on the pattern of behavior, what's the function of Martha's behavior? Most likely, it's to get attention. Armed with the pattern and function of the behavior, we can use the ABCs to our advantage, adjusting the environment to reduce the chance of problem behavior occurring again. So when it comes to the antecedent of the behavior, what could we do to prevent that behavior from happening? When it comes to the behavior itself, what behavior do we want to teach instead? This behavior should help the student to get a little bit of what they want, but in a more desirable way. And with regards to the consequences, we want to use the consequences to make the undesirable behavior inefficient and the new, more desirable behavior more efficient, getting the student what he, she, or they want more readily. When we know the function behind a behavior, we can make better decisions about how to adjust the environment or intervene to reduce the likelihood of a target behavior happening again. So let's see how we can apply these principles to the case of Martha. Remember, we think that the function of her behavior is to get attention. So to prevent the behavior from happening, we could provide her with lots of attention before the behavior can happen. So kind of front loading that attention, such as greeting her at the door, checking in with her throughout the class, and making sure that we make lots of eye contact. To promote a new behavior, a more desirable behavior, we could teach her to raise her hand and provide her with reminders to do so before she has an opportunity to call out. Maybe with a quick statement broadly to the class saying, remember class, I only call on students who raise their hands quietly. And as far as consequence strategies, the teacher might call on Martha only when she raises her hand, and that should encourage her to raise her hand more because she wants that attention. And the teacher might ignore any calling out in order to discourage her from any future calling out. You can also apply the ABCs to entire classes. Here's an example of a sixth grade class where about a third of the class has been receiving office discipline referrals after being dismissed from class. The A in this scenario, or the antecedent, is students wandering around trying to figure out where to put their work, and then too many of them leaving the classroom at one time. The B, or the behavior, is physical contact and arguing with each other while rushing to get out the door to the hallway and to socialize with each other. And the C, or the consequence, is that they get a lot of social contact during all that hustle and bustle, and also once they get out into the hallway. So they get to socialize even more. So the function of this class's behavior seems to be to gain attention in the form of socializing. So if the students are arguing and shoving each other to get to the hallway to socialize, how could the teacher create a plan to prevent, teach, and respond to those behaviors? To prevent the behaviors, a teacher might create a routine where he, she, they dismiss students one table or row at a time and collect the work as they're walking out. To teach a replacement behavior, he might teach, practice, and prompt waiting and proper exit behavior, such as walking out the door single file at arm's distance. And with regards to responding to the behavior, the teacher may reinforce proper waiting and walking with lots of social praise and possibly some opportunities for peer social activities. When the students make contact with each other or argue or rush out the door, she may call students back to the classroom to sit and wait until their other peers have already gone. And maybe she'll have them practice the proper exiting routine, which will further reduce their chances to socialize in the hallway, or at least for that episode. So thinking about how you can use the function of behavior and the ABCs to support your classes, and as a whole, use your office discipline referral to find patterns. This may require that you modify your forms and your system to include a place for a function. Once you've determined a function or functions of a behavior, create preventative, teaching, and consequence strategies that address that function of escape or access. Otherwise, you may run the risk of mistakenly encouraging the behavior you don't want to see, like sending a student out to the reflection room for crying when what the student wants is to escape. Not only do we, as the adults, need to be able to identify the why of a behavior in order to respond appropriately, but we also need to respond to students in ways that support their emotional and behavioral stability rather than escalating problem behavior. Take a moment and pause the video to read through the scenario of this teacher and Jason. Have you ever found yourself in a power struggle like this or watched a colleague have a similar experience? The scenario you just read walked you through a scene where interactions on the parts of both the student and the teacher escalated the situation to being unsafe. It was essentially a power struggle. It would be easy to blame the student for his actions, but he's a student. He's learning. We're the adults. We have more experience, more power, and more control. The responsibility is largely on us to guide and de escalate our students. In order to do so, as adults, we need an understanding of patterns of human behavior, including the functions of behavior, and how we can intervene depending on a student's emotional and behavioral state. The key is prevention. When a student is behaviorally and emotionally calm, this is when students think most clearly and can learn. This is when we should be teaching social, emotional, and behavioral skills, not when they're escalated or in a crisis. If you have a student who struggles to regulate his, her, their emotions and behaviors, it's when they're calm that you want to teach those desirable replacement behaviors, like asking for help, taking a break, or taking deep breaths. So, how do we ensure that our students are calm and how can we reestablish calm? Well, we put systems and practices in place like teaching expectations and routines, practicing those expectations and routines, maintaining predictable schedules, and being fair with and consistent with our responses. Within those routines, we should be teaching functional coping strategies like breathing and relaxing. We can also arrange the environment to promote calm, like making sure students have all their own space and being strategic with seating to reduce opportunities for teasing. But the reality is that despite our efforts to control the environment, including ourselves, something may happen that escalates a student emotionally and or behaviorally. In that case, it's helpful to have an understanding of how to respond to a student at each stage of escalation. These responses need to be calculated to help the student and ourselves to re-regulate. These responses should include a continuum of responses for the child and for ourselves, just like you see here on this graph, including routines to neutralize the situation. Sometimes it feels like educators are supposed to be superheroes. We're supposed to know it all and have everything under control at all times. The reality is that we're human, we're fallible, we make mistakes, and we have less than perfect days. Part of being able to prevent and respond to crisis situations is self-awareness, especially around how we might be contributing to a crisis. Another part is having strategies to address what we know about ourselves. Think about a scenario where you found yourself in a power struggle or in an escalating situation with a student. Was there something about that situation that triggered or agitated you? What was that thing? Is this something that frequently triggers you? How do you respond? We call these moments vulnerable decision points. These are the moments in our lives when, due to our frustration, we may not make the most rational decisions. We all have pet peeves or triggers like disrespect, loud noises, or threats. It's just a reality, so it's best to have a plan for when you're exposed to those triggers. What can you do when you encounter a triggering situation, otherwise a vulnerable decision point? Could you ask a colleague to trade out with you and give you a break? Could you use some mental reframing, like he's just a kid, he's still learning? Or could you use a coping skill like deep breathing? This could be your two-step neutralizing routine. First, recognizing when you're agitated. Second, then doing something about it so that your agitation doesn't further escalate your student or other students. Having a neutralizing routine also helps you to manage those vulnerable decision points that can lead to reactive student punishment. So, as a team, reflect on the example that I provided earlier and consider how the escalation may have been avoided by identifying examples of intervening early, manipulating the environment, pre teaching a replacement behavior for the student, and utilizing a neutralizing or fast routine. Then discuss the extent to which power struggles are an issue at your school and how you can establish some school wide neutralizing routines for staff. Finally, Make a plan for how you will provide this content regarding the functions of behavior, strategies to manage power struggles, uh, vulnerable decision points, and neutralizing routines in a professional development for staff, and submit your agenda or calendar via the Canvas system. Thank you for taking the time to review this video focused on answering the whys behind behavior and strategies for responding. Please feel free to reach out to your trainers if you have any questions or if you would like support in completing your team tasks. Thank you very much and take care.